Fantastic 2016. We had a welcome session from the president at 10, and had a good crowd then, and good to see many of you back here now. One note before we start, some of you may need to back up so you don't block the stage. If you get too close, it's a little intimidating sometimes. If you start coming up on the steps there, you can go up on the side steps or something like that is great. But giving the recorder a clear shot and not being staring in the face with Michelle, I'm sure she'd appreciate that. Of course, she can always look away from the screen, I guess. That helps. Anyway, good to have you all, and just wanted to give you just a word of introduction about Dr. Michelle Miller. I'm not going to go through the whole bio because you read that and that kind of thing. I would like to say a little bit. Michelle was our closing keynoter last year, and we so much enjoyed her being in the conference throughout, spending time in the sessions, asking questions, and making comments that were useful into just improving the whole conference. And it was just such a lot of fun. I had the opportunity to meet Michelle at the Online Learning Consortium conference back in October. And it was just like we'd known each other, even though I'd only known her as an avatar. She looked like her avatar and everything. So it was interesting. And, of course, the voice is familiar. So I hope you'll enjoy it and enjoy your session. I think it's going to be a great time, and we're excited that she could be back with us this year. So enjoy the session. And when she asks for comments, you can do one of two things. You can walk your avatar over to that platform there in the middle, where your voice will be amplified, or you can right-click, go to Voice, and select Shout, and that will amplify your voice. You're going to be muted before then, but you can take yourself off mute by pressing the M key when you need to, except for Tracy is not muted. So, Tracy, press your M key. There you go. Great, thanks. Okay, without further ado, Dr. Michelle Miller. Thank you.
All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everybody. In particular, for the opportunity to speak to this engaged group today in this fun format. And thank you so much for those of you who took the time to come and participate today. So you are the kind of engaged practitioners that I always gain so much from, and I love interacting with whenever I can. So welcome to Fantastic 2016. Our theme for this year is connections and the future of digital learning. And when I heard that from Patrick, I was hooked. I think that this is just the exact theme that we need to be thinking about right now. And it's been very much on my mind lately. So, I want to jump in with a little bit about the perspective I'm coming from. I started out my life as an academic and a teacher, as a research psychologist. And you're going to pick up on the fact that this orientation towards research, the cognitive and brain sciences especially, underlies a lot of what I do. But I am also a very practical person at heart. And, I'm always the one who's looking for solutions and looking for the things that we can do today with what we have and with the actual colleagues we work with to make things better. And that's where this idea of powerful connections comes in. So as I've gotten deeper into questions of how we bring together technology, psychology, and the learning sciences, I've realized that we have to connect those to practical questions of how we get innovative teaching practices implemented in real environments. So, that in turn gets into a lot of institutional, organizational dynamics that we've all encountered, but I feel that we don't often talk about in a frank way. And there's even connections outside of our institutions that we need to make if technology is going to realize its promise to transform learning worldwide. And an event like this is a great opportunity to start opening those questions and making those connections. So let's start here. Promise number one, the promise of technology. And this first promise is that technology expands access to higher education and to higher learning. right? So wave your hands or leap up in the air like Patrick's doing. Go crazy if you've heard this one before in some variation. Technology expands access, right? So, okay, on one level, yeah, this is a very straightforward idea. So if you can't physically get yourself to a place where you can do a face-to-face traditional program, well, here's something that you can do online, right? Or you can do part of it online. And, this is an important promise, sure. And, I can certainly relate to this because I come from a very unique region myself. That's where I work. I'm in an area with some of the most physically and socially isolated communities in the United States. And this picture in my background right here is from my neck of the woods in Monument Valley, near, among other things, the Navajo Nation. So I get this promise, right? But there's also a more nuanced thread, I think, to this access concept. There's more to access than just, physical proximity. And it's this. You'll get farther with your education. You'll learn more and maybe even in less time. And so we're better able to address individual learning needs, to personalize. So some things say like a barrier in foundational math. That doesn't need to sideline you as a student from the course that you need or even the career that you want. And we can, and we do, identify these barriers so much more easily now with our technology. And we can address them without making everybody else stop out and do the same thing at the same time, right? And this is great. This is a great promise. And here's another promise that I think is really important, especially to me and the background that I'm from. And that's this. And it's that technology lets us instantiate learning science, right, in ways that we never could before. So, here again, practical person that I am, I just love this idea. The idea that we could take these findings that have been piling up in research journals for years and years and years and put that in the hands of people in classrooms and implement those things, that's amazing. To make these ideas doable, sometimes even efficiently and sometimes on a large scale with our technologies. And, I've been writing about this and talking about this, as have other people, for what feels like a very long time now. And this is a big promise, right? That we can teach in ways that are better grounded in learning science. So I did want to kick off with highlighting some of these findings and ideas, big concepts from learning science that I think that we can really have at the front of our minds as we design our online learning experiences. But I did want to preface that with a bit of a caveat today, which is that I do just want to highlight some of these. This is not the talk where I'm going to be kind of digging into detail about the background and the backing for all of these ideas from learning science. Among other things, that's the talk I gave last year at Fantastech, and Patrick Spen has very graciously provided that talk if you'd like to go through it. So with that caution in mind, though, what are some of these ideas from learning science that I think are so important to us that we can start tapping into? Here's one broad group of them, the ones that I would subsume under applied memory, the findings from memory that we can harness in our learning designs to allow students to build a base of knowledge more efficiently and sometimes more effectively. Now, this topic also comes with its own caveat, which is this, that, all of us engaged practitioners and teachers know that memory is not all there is to learning, right? So I wanted to kind of defuse that sensitivity right off the bat. In no way am I trying to imply that memory is the only thing about learning we need to be concerned with, or even the most important thing. That said, I think many of us do believe that building that basis of knowledge is one of the important things that we accomplish with our teaching. So we talk about some of the key findings. Here's a couple. Now, first off is a group of findings around the testing or retrieval practice effect, right? And this is one that's gotten a lot of press recently, and it's really great to see a lot of people adopting and taking advantage of this more. in their teaching, especially with when the book Make It Stick came out. I don't know if you've seen this one, but talks a lot about this retrieval practice and testing effect. So it's basically this, that when we actually retrieve information, be that in a test, a quiz, or any other kind of even informal situation, when we pull it out of memory, we can pull it out more easily in the future. Right, so that's a better learning and memory activity than pretty much anything else we can do with our time. All right, so there's that effect. Now here's another though that is a little bit newer to the scene and not as many people have heard about, but I think it's very exciting, and that's test potentiated learning. So test potentiated learning is kind of a mouthful as far as a term, but it's pretty intuitive when you dig into what it is, and it's this. So as we know as memory scientists, when students just restudy information, kind of go back over it, that actually has very little effect on their ability to recall. So that's not a great use of time, but there's an exception. When we've taken a test, when we've tried to practice retrieving information and we miss an item, right, like we get a test question wrong, then when we go back and restudy, that actually works. So testing, and especially when we miss something and know we missed it, that kind of activates the effectiveness of restudy. So that's test potentiated learning. And you can look at that and say, well, wow, there's a lot we could do with that, with things like adaptive quizzing systems. So there's those effects. Here's another, which I put under this big umbrella of kind of the ability to optimally time and space practice. All right. So there's also a large research literature that says essentially this, that whether your study and practice actually makes a difference, its effectiveness depends a lot on how you time your practice. So if I say have 2 hours to study, I'm going to get more out of that if I chop that up into 4 half-hour sessions as opposed to 2 one-hour sessions, or 1 2-hour session, or break it up just by an hour at a time. Now, educational technology doesn't give us the ability to perfectly control when students sit down and study the information, but it gives us a lot more control than we used to have. So I can require that students practice on a daily basis, do reading quizzes and things like this to distribute their practice more optionally. So there's that group of findings. Here's some others that I think practitioners can tap into. The feedback factor, right? So this can be something kind of straightforward, like, say, a multiple choice test where students get immediate feedback that's auto-graded so they know how they did on something like a reading quiz or a pre-class quiz, right? And that works especially well if, for example, we have a large test bank, so we are, just giving the same items over and over. But it can go deeper than that. You can use your technology to do things like distribute rubric scores for individual parts of a larger writing assignment. You can set up a question and answer forum online where students can ask questions about the material or the class itself and answer each other's questions as well. Maybe that could even be moderated by another undergraduate learning assistant. And then there's the actionable part of feedback, which I think sometimes does get lost in the mix. So it's very powerful when professors, instructors use the information that builds up in things like learning management systems for diagnostics. I mean, we're the experts, and so we can say, hey, I'm seeing a pattern of scores here that's a red flag that you need to come in for extra help, or I can direct you to a special module that will work really well for you. So essentially, using learning analytics. So in a way, this could go pretty deep as well in our role as instructors, thinking of ourselves less as people who just put content in front of students, and spending more of our attention on monitoring how students interact with the information and intervening in customized ways. So feedback, that's another hot area that we can tap into. Authentic learning experiences, making learning authentic, right? So this is something that we all know is really important for creating deep learning that sticks. And it's a little funny, though, to talk about this in the context of educational technology because so many of us think of online life as somehow fake and real life as authentic and the real thing. But if you think about it, this is what a lot of public content that's student created allows us to do, right? So, you can have students make work products that aren't just a paper written for one person, me, audience of one, the instructor, and never shown to the outside world. You can have them creating work products that have an impact outside the context of you and the classroom. And if you look at this website that I've actually put up here, you have wondered why I have something on a Greek volcano showing in a conference like this. I'm putting this up here as an example of exactly this kind of authentic learning philosophy instantiated with online tools. So a little background on what this is. This is, you're seeing here a shot of the NAU in Greece blog. And this is connected to a very unusual and innovative class that's run by an NAU colleague of mine named Lisa Skinner. Now, what Lisa Skinner does, she's a geologist, and so she takes a group of students to the Santorini volcano every summer. And the twist here is that these are young undergraduate students who have just finished their freshman and sophomore years in college. And as she was designing this experience, saying, how can I maximize this learning experience for students? And now it is short. She's not going to take them all summer, just for 2 weeks. So she was casting about for what's the right way to have a learning activity that ties into this and maximizes it. Well, she thought about having a paper, having them do essay quizzes, and she hit on the idea of making this public blog where students would write about what they were experiencing and seeing, the history, the culture, the geology. And it served a dual purpose, that these students also had some pretty concerned families back at home who really wanted to see, what is my student doing each day? How are they experiencing this? So mom and dad can see the blog. Other people, former student groups, they can all see the blog. Your friends can see the blog. And that really amps up the investment that students will make in an assignment like this. And here's one last one that I did want to highlight for you, and that is the role of multimedia. There is so much research, right, that shows that especially that when you are trying to illustrate a complex process or a dynamic, when you pair sound, visuals, diagrams, animations, that gets at these concepts so much more effectively than words alone. And if you're trying to teach or train something with a visual component, multimedia is really your best friend, right? So with those ideas in mind, let's think back to that promise. That's our promise. We want to do more for more people with a better basis in learning science than we've ever had. So our next question for today is, how close are we to delivering on this? Right? And I want to offer you a really, personal perspective that comes from working with a lot of faculty and many institutions over time in this topic. So, I think there's so many reasons to be optimistic. And here's a couple reasons why I say this. First off, engaged faculty. Engaged faculty, instructional designers, and even administrators who, we give a hard time to our administrators sometimes, but many of them are passionately committed to realizing this promise. And whenever I attend an event like this, I'm just bowled over by how many practitioners are pouring their time, their effort, their professional capital into this. We also have this great point where tech has become mainstream in a way that it really wasn't in some of its early years and for some of our early careers. So I think we are blessedly past a lot of this early stuff about, can anybody really learn anything from a computer? And is this online thing just a fad, right? And the choices we have. We have so many technologies and tools to choose from today. It's no longer a question of just kind of trying to scratch around and say, oh, what could I possibly incorporate into my classes? I feel like sometimes I go to bed and I wake up and there's 5 more ed tech companies out there that I've never heard of. And they've got these great products that they've created and are so enthusiastic about learning. So literally overnight, we have more choices. But there are barriers. So I think that we still face some challenges. And although it's a little provocative, I do want to open up some of those challenges for you here today. So first, challenges that come from some of our institutional dynamics, the pushback, the friction that we have within our institutions that get in between us and realizing this promise of institutional technology. So, first looking at these, here's one. Many institutions still haven't gotten to that point of having a real, coherent, well-articulated vision of what role technology is going to play in, what we do for our students, right? So lacking a coherent vision, not just for, what technology are we going to invest in, but how are we going to use it and why are we going to use it, right? Here's another. And this one I have shamelessly borrowed from one of my favorite organizations, the National Center for Academic Transformation. They pointed this out years ago, and I think that this is still a real concern. So this is what I call the lone hero fallacy. Okay, and it goes something like this. So here's our vision for technology in our institution. Well, how are we going to do it? Well, so-and-so is a real whiz with the technology, right? So maybe Bob down the hall, he's great with that stuff. And, Sue in the next department over, she's fantastic. She just works wonders with this challenging class or this one group of students. And that's our plan. We're going to depend on Bob and Sue and these highly motivated individuals to carry us as far as what we're going to do with technology and our students. So actually wave your hand or jump up or go crazy if you think you've ever encountered some variation of the lone hero fallacy. All right, it's going to be the individual, some individual's going to carry this. Okay. Now, I'm not disparaging the idea of being a technology leader in your institution or of speaking up and advocating for what tech can do for our students. But it's problematic when we link technology to being the special project of a couple of special people. Among other things, when that person burns out because we've put too much on them or they move on, think about all that we lose. And it really doesn't support that idea of having a larger coherent vision, does it? Okay, here's another. The tech will fix it fallacy, okay? Now this one I run into a little less than I used to, so I think we've made progress as institutions. But here's how this goes. Okay, we want more educational technology on our campus, so we're going to start a grant program, and that will just somehow make student success go through the roof, right? Now we haven't actually analyzed our problems, which likely go a little bit deeper than not having enough tech. But we're also going to be sure to fall apart and run screaming when we run into any kind of initial problems or difficulties with the implementation. And if we don't see instant results, we're going to decide that this stuff just doesn't work. Okay, so tech will fix it fallacy. And lastly, there's one that it's a little hard to talk about because this has to do with the pushback we sometimes get from our colleagues. So, the faculty barriers and the faculty reactions around technology, I think we could put under this topic that there's sometimes this feeling or idea that when we do things online, blend, go hybrid, support face-to-face classes with teaching, that's kind of cheapening what we do. That when you put it online, you're kind of giving it away. So people will give us some real philosophical sounding objections to these. So, I think as well, as I have here, underlying this, what's the real fear? Having talked to a lot of people about some of the issues that they have and the questions they have, I think that sometimes those big philosophical objections of does tech cheapen our teaching, sometimes that conceals much more practical concerns that are sometimes well-grounded, such as this. Well, how much time is this going to take? Am I going to get in way over my head? And if I run into problems or glitches, I mean, who pays the price? The students are going to come down on me in my student evaluations, and I don't know if I can handle that. So these fears and concerns that we get from our faculty colleagues can be bruising, and they can really slow down the progress that we make. All right. So those are some of our barriers in our institutions. But I'm not going to let the technology off the hook either. So, while this is hard, and I don't want to name a lot of names, because I know a lot of our tech providers are fantastic, and they work so hard to create these new innovative products for us. I think that sometimes our technologies could do more for us as well. So I'm going to activate a couple of barriers on the technology side too. So how does the tech itself sometimes get in the way of realizing our promises? So there's the group of issues that I'll call not ready for prime time. Okay, so just those basic issues with getting the thing to work smoothly with your students in your classroom and to use it. So tech that doesn't talk to your learning management system. Tech that doesn't output data in a form that you can really readily use for things like giving students credit for using it, right? If you're a veteran, for example, of some of our early student response systems, the clicker systems, then you know that this can be really aggravating and really make you question whether you ever should have adopted this technology in the first place. Here's another. Technology that's slick, that is something really new and novel, and maybe works really well, but doesn't really link back to some of those big issues and things we wanted to accomplish. It doesn't link back to the learning principles. Or it's a great solution that's in search of a problem. And I've seen some real head scratchers at conferences. As I walk around and see the newest ed tech tool that entrepreneurs have come up with, I sometimes think, well, how does this solve a problem for me as a teacher? And lastly, probably my least favorite problem I run into with technology sometimes is content issues. So with those educational technologies that actually have the content in them, something that you're presenting to students, material to learn, and there's something factually wrong with it. Now, here's another wave your hand or jump up if you've ever run into this. You've actually uncovered a factual error. Something is wrong with that material. Yeah. Wow, that is really demoralizing when you see that. And if it's really integrated into that technology, that's very hard to fix. Now, of course, our traditional textbooks and other materials, they can absolutely have these problems, same thing. But I think that this can be particularly problematic in a technology tool because, when we do take these things out to our more skeptical colleagues and they look at them, well, they're going to spot the problems. And that creates this aura of poor quality around the whole tool and maybe even around the whole idea of incorporating that technology, right? So these are some of the things that do get in the way. So, without being too pessimistic here, I think that we aren't quite there yet. We still have a ways to go in realizing that promise of access and instantiating learning science. But that's okay because practitioners like us, I believe, have a great deal of power from where we are to use our energy to address these. How do we do it? Connections. So let's circle back around and start thinking about how we reach out and make the connections in these areas. And I'm going to kind of go in reverse order here and start with the technology. What do we do about these? Well, what I want to do is offer you a short list of things that I think we should be looking for in our technology. A short shopping list, if you will. characteristics that, while not every tool has to have every characteristic, can really help guide us in choosing the right tools and reinforcing the ones that we want in the future. And these do connect back to learning science. So we are making that connection as well, linking what we know, those concepts we know about student learning, to concrete qualities that we can find in our technology. So before I show you my list, though, I do want to preview something, which is that I want to bring a little bit of interactivity to this experience, and I am too frightened to do something like put you in breakout sessions in this virtual world. But I'm going to be asking everyone to be thinking about 3 questions, all right? And after I give you my shopping list, I'm going to let you think about that for a second, and then I want to sample some of the answers that you have. So here's the questions I want to pose to you. I want you to be thinking about an example of a tool that you know of that does one of these things really well. So of the 4 characteristics I'm going to present, what's something that you think just nails it in one of these arenas? Conversely, what's a tool that kind of covers the most bases, that does most of these at once? And lastly, what do you think is still missing from the available technology? So if you could wave a wand and have any of these in one of your technologies, what would that be? All right? So with that, here's what I think we should look for. I think that we really need to be seeking out tools that use the multimedia substantively and with some basis in research. Now, even if you're not completely well-versed in multimedia theory, I think we could still tell as an instructor when you're looking at a tool that uses multimedia just as kind of decoration or up the fun factor versus something that uses video, diagrams, animations to really teach the material. And when you find that, that can be very powerful. And that really gets my attention when I'm looking for a tool. We should look for tools that take advantage of what we know about memory, which is a great deal at this point. So, can you see evidence that that tool is going to take advantage of things like the testing effect, or it's going to push students to rehearse and retrieve the material more frequently and with more distributed practice? Tools that, if they do provide content, not only is that content great quality, but it presents it in a way that gets out of that rut of here's some slides and maybe a quiz at the end. And lastly, critically, I think that we need to be looking for tools that emphasize the ability to use the material. So does this tool give me new ways to have students actually use what they're learning and develop those skills? So not just to see the material, but to actually apply it. So those are 4 qualities that, as I said, really get my attention. And here's where I want to try to call on you to see what you have to offer as far as examples. So thinking about this first question, a tool that you think really maps onto one of these qualities really well. Anybody raise their hand, unmute themselves, or come to the microphone and tell us, just real quick, what's a good example of something that uses multimedia in a great way, gets students doing retrieval practice, something like that? What do you think? Anybody have a tool that think? And I'm surveying the crowd. I don't see any hands just yet. Well, let me open up all 3 of the questions then. You'll have to tell us which one you're answering, but raise your virtual hand or come to the microphone and give us an example.
I'm not sure how to raise my virtual hand, but I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Michelle?
I sure can. Who am I hearing from?
Barbara Cotter.
Hi.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
With Kahoot be one of the tools that we use, because we do actually get one of the tools that we use to get our students really engaged. Would that be considered one of the tools that you're looking at?
that. I think that if that comes to your mind when you look at some of these characteristics, and I think that's a good example. And maybe in some of the conversations with colleagues, you can expand on exactly how you're using that tool.
We use it not just as we use it mostly to get feedback from the students either at the beginning to initiate a lesson, although I've noticed that many teachers do use it as a form of assessment at the end to see what does actually have grasped from a concept that was used. For me, I see it as an awesome tool for getting feedback, not just from the students, but also from the teachers at the beginning, during, and at the end of a class or a session.
So distributing some of the retrieval that students are doing, plus really getting them actively doing the retrieving. Good example. Okay, who else wants to make a contribution?
The only contribution I want to make is if you're now, Rebecca is on the platform, so that works great.
Oh.
Or if you're not going to the platform, right-click, go to voice, and change it to shout. And that way you'll be amplified, and then mute when you're through. But the microphone works too. So sorry, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Oh, very good.
That's okay.
Rebecca, yes. Let's hear
Are
from
you
you.
able to hear me?
Yes.
I am hoping that others can hear as well. A tool that I found that does one of those well, I think, is the Pearson's My Math Lab software, because it's interactive with students. It's based on personalized learning. It meets the students where they're at. There's an opportunity for reviewing concepts that the student's not understanding, and they can go quickly through things that they're already getting. It's not particularly visually appealing, and it needs to do a better job of using multimedia, but I think it's very good for learning.
Great. So it's getting there. It's getting there. There's some areas where it can be refined, but it's definitely emphasizing that skill practice, right? So it's great to watch somebody else doing math, but getting in there and doing it yourself, we know that that's what works. Right. Thank you. All right. Well, these are some food for thought questions that, again, I think in some of our interactions can focus our discussions and get us sharing information. So here's a very powerful thing that I think can flow out of this idea of focusing on the characteristics we want to look for. And that is opening up the connections to the tech providers, right? So when we find something that is accomplishing something for students, it's smooth and easy to use, and it's hitting these targets, we should trumpet that to the skies. We should tell our administrators that this is a high priority, that we have access to these. We should tell the companies that we like this and what we like about it. And conversely, when there's a miss, I think it's reasonable to reach out and say that as well. As you just mentioned with the critique, with some of the points about My Math Lab, here's how a good product can be made a lot better. And I think for us to get to that promise of what digital learning can do, we've got to open up more two-way conversations between the people who make the technology and those of us who are using it on the front lines. Now, I wanted to provide a personal experience as well, just with, what a small example of this two-way conversation can look like at a recent interaction that I thought was very heartening. And that is my experience talking to a company called Flipped, which makes a phone app I'll tell you about in a second. And just so you know, I don't have any real connection to the Flipped company. I don't have any stake in it. I learned about it when one of their executives made a comment on an article that I'd written about student distractions in classrooms. Now, wave your hand if students distracted on their phones and other devices has been something of a friction point for you or people that you know. Yeah. All right. So that's a big one with many instructors. And so while we might not think of a phone app as educational technology, I think it can be used this way. So what Flipped does is it essentially locks down your phone voluntarily for a pre-specified amount of time and gives a bounce back message so that, it's not just total silence if people are texting you. And the twist here is that Flipped is also social so that you can join a little group where the leader of the group can flip off. Sorry, that's what it's called. You could flip everybody off at once. So we could be studying together or in a class and say, okay, everybody, we're going to turn off our phones for now, and we're all going to do it. So, Flipped came up with this idea for other reasons, but very quickly realized that this has real applications for professors and classes. And I've talked to them on the phone and also corresponded to them by email, and they've been very open and receptive to, what would make this more usable for a real instructor in a real classroom. And they're actually running some pilots with faculty right now. And if you'd like to, there's my contact at the company. If you'd like to email her and let her know that I sent you, she can give you more information about how to pilot this in a class. And what they want to do is get the information back from faculty and use that to refine the product. So, that's been my experience of what can happen when you say, I'm just going to reach out and I'm going to say what I want if I'm not seeing something out there already. Now, turning back to those barriers at our institutions and sometimes with our colleagues and how we make connections that get us over those. So, opening up productive conversations with our colleagues about mindful use of technology or really any other kind of innovative innovation and change in our institutions. Here's something that I found incredibly effective, and that's this, that you open these conversations and continually reinforce this idea of student accountability, right? So we get derailed, I believe. We start out conversations with some kind of implication that this technology is a shortcut, right? That it's here to let students do less and to provide less. Now, what we need to do, on the other hand, when we start out by saying right off the bat, this is about getting students to invest effort, right? A lot of barriers come down. And, technology can and should be a tool to elicit the kind of productive effort that we, the teachers, the experts, know is necessary to achieve expertise. And so, when we look at it that way, EdTech isn't there to cheapen or to give anything away. It's there to make students accountable for what they need to do. So when students need to do more practice or revisit some content, well, it's on them to do that, but here is a way to make that happen without having to personally police everybody or follow them every step of the way. And, you take something simple like adaptive release of content, which I know a lot of us design into online courses. And so, with that idea, until you can solve something or demonstrate mastery, show that you've passed a basic content quiz, you can't move on. And that's a real way of making accountability a part of the course with technology. Using things like pre-class quizzes, as many of my colleagues do, that's another way to get students accountable before they come into class or lab that they've done the basic work to get the most out of that experience. And you would be amazed how many barriers come down when you make it clear that we're getting the students to engage and be accountable, not just to make things more complex for the faculty. And in a way, we're really starting our conversations around shared values, right? And when we do that, the barriers come down. So that's something kind of conceptual we can do when we approach people in our institutions to talk about what technology we're going to use and why. Now, kind of tackling some of our other dynamics and pushback reactions. Thinking back to that idea of our lone hero, that using technology effectively in institutions, that's the responsibility of just a couple of super motivated people. Now, addressing this, I think that what we can do is borrow from what the course redesign movement has told us for a long time, and that is that there needs to be a mindset shift away from seeing a course as a bunch of individual classes, and instead start seeing our courses that we teach as things that belong to all of us in a department and in a discipline. Which is not to say that we're trying to standardize or police people. Rather that we need to come together around some shared visions of what we want our courses to accomplish and what tools are critical that we're going to use to get that to happen. So when you move away from the lone hero It leads us towards a more planful, more consistent vision towards what tech we need to have in our courses and why. And believe it or not, this can also take the edge off of that issue around, this is really going to be too much work for me, and I'm kind of scared to do it. And I want to give you one very concrete example of how this can play out and what I mean by that. I want to take the example of reorganizing a course, a multi-section course, to designate an official coordinator. So wave your hand if any of you are formally doing this in your departments right now, having course coordinators in one form or another. All right? So this is becoming more common, but I wouldn't say it's completely commonplace yet. So what is a course coordinator, and how can that be important for tackling the lone hero issue? Well, you could construe this role in a lot of different ways, but really it's about having someone who's designated to speak for a course, and whose responsibility it is to see that critical practices and objectives are carried across sections and across semesters, and that includes technology tools. Now, when we did this in Psychology 101 years back as part of a very formal redesign here at Northern Arizona University, this was a big component of it, and here's how we tackled it here. So our Psychology 101 course, we were running about 4 to 6 different large sections every semester, and we had traditionally done that just by kind of rounding up different instructors and having a common textbook and setting them loose. But what we did going forward is we designated this coordinator and counted this as part of their teaching. So that was a very intentional step for us to say, teaching Psychology 101, Intro to Psych, comprises many things, and coordinating the course is one of those things. Sometimes that person was also teaching a face-to-face section, and sometimes they weren't in front of students at all. But this was an integral part of the course. Among other things, this coordinator was responsible for setting up the learning management shell with critical tools that we'd agreed were really important to enhance the course and increase student accountability for learning the material before they came into class. So one of these things was setting up a test bank to do repeatable reading quizzes every week, so spaced practice across the semester with the material. And this was a huge project when we first tackled it. So it was on the coordinator to set this up the first time. We imported all these questions from the test bank, and we had to coordinate with the publisher. There was so much work that went on. And you could see quite reasonably that working alone, individual instructors hadn't been interested in doing that. But when it's the coordinator's job to do that, well, suddenly it's not so hard to say, yeah, I'm going to have these pre-class reading quizzes, and I'm going to have them consistently across the semester because they're already in my shell. So carrying those critical practices across sections and semesters, that's what a coordinator can do. And just the process needed to set that up also starts a lot of good conversations about what we want the course to accomplish. And that's what can make technology adoption efficient and offset that feeling of overwhelm. So, I want us to be thinking in our question and answer that we're going to have right after this section, this presentation, about some of these barriers. So I want you to think about barriers that I talked about here that you've personally experienced, the lone hero, the tech will fix it syndrome. I want you to also think about barriers that I didn't talk about, right? Because this is by no means an exhaustive list, and you've had some other experiences. And also to be thinking about solutions, right? So I suggested a few, but I know that in this group here, there are so many other ideas that you've tried and that have worked. So with that, connections to remember and to be talking about in this experience that we're going to have here at Fantastic in these days to come. Here's the ones that I want to leave you with. I want you to be thinking about the connections between learning science and the teaching techniques we use with technology and otherwise. So what have you picked up from discoveries in cognitive sciences, brain sciences, educational research that inform our teaching? I want us to be thinking about the goals we have as teachers, what we're really trying to accomplish, the objectives that we have for our courses and our learning environments that we create, and what technologies are a perfect fit to those goals. I want us to be forging, of course, those connections I talked about between the technology makers, those visionaries, those entrepreneurs and companies, and those of us who use the technology. Engaged colleagues, those connections from person to person, the people who are out on the forefront of making these things happen in our institutions. Those conversations are so powerful, and this is a great time to have them. And lastly, the conversations that we may be having after an experience like this, between those of us who are the evangelists and the leaders in technology and our colleagues who have their doubts and who are not so sure. I hope that what I've given you are some ideas for how to start those conversations off on the right foot, to start fresh and to make progress in realizing the promise of what digital learning and educational technology can do. And with that, I'm going to send us forth with that promise we're all devoted to, more learning for more people than ever before. And this is how you move from being a lone hero to being a technology leader. All right, so thank you so much for your attention and your engagement with those ideas. And I want us to have some more interaction around those ideas of barriers and questions you have. All right. Maybe, Patrick, maybe you can assist me in moderating some Q&A with our question and answer time.
Well, we have a few minutes, but we do have another presenter at 1, so...
Yes.
Any of you have any questions, comments? No snide remarks, please.
Oh.
Remember, you have to press M to take yourself off mute. And also either go to the podium back there or right-click, voice, shout.
Just a quick comment.
Marion's going to the microphone.
That's Barbara. Can you hear me?
I'm hoping everyone can hear me.
Wait a minute, Marion. I think Barbara's Barbara, if you're giving a comment, please right-click, go down to voice, and click on shout so that we can all hear you. Oh, Barbara's back on mute now. Go ahead, Marion.
Okay. I teach history and political science, and those are courses where the longer I teach, the less I care about how many facts my students can give out, because facts are so easy to put your hands on now, and more about how to encourage that questioning and analytical thinking. And what I like about the technology is that I can pull in the media to create situations that hopefully will trigger some of that thinking. But at the same time, it is very difficult to, quote, assess that thinking on an ongoing basis where we're giving meaningful feedback to students. Because I could see me constantly in grade mode, and as someone who has a whole lot of other things on their plate, I wouldn't want to be that way. I'd like to know what kind of technology advances do you see on the future that will help us encourage and assess more of our students' development of critical thinking, challenging of information kind of skills?
Yeah. And by the way, I did, just so you know, I crashed and I had to come back into the environment, so I'm afraid I just caught the tail end of that. But I think I have the gist of this really important question from Marianne. So that's right. How do we, especially with class sizes getting larger all the time, how do we engage with and give appropriate feedback for this more substantive, thinking-oriented assignments? I think two exciting fronts maybe are not so much. One is not so much the technology, but rather how we organize some of our grading. And this is more of us are experimenting with more peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer assessment, right? And obviously, this can be a very complex thing, but it is possible to set up systems that are fair and productive for students to give more feedback on each other's work products, sometimes before they get to you. So what you're looking at is something that's more refined and doesn't need quite as much kind of the more foundational feedback. And sometimes that can be, just grading of the work product itself. So that's one thing that I think that we can look at to offset and keep reasonable the grading load on the instructor. So that's one possibility. I think too we can always look at how much more can we automate and take off of our plate on that with respect to foundational knowledge. So, if I'm doing less of the grading on did students kind of get the knowledge foundation, the less I do in that realm, the more I can focus on are they getting the critical thinking of this? Are they seeing the connections among the different topics that I'm teaching? So we are not to the point of having some really quick out-of-the-box solutions to this question, but I think it's a really important one to be thinking about.
Any more final short question? One more maybe? We need to clear so Christy can start setting up.
That's okay. Patrick, are you able to hear me?
Yes. Everybody else can too.
Okay, very good. That's all right. Just wanted to say that if this session goes over a little bit because there are more questions or there's more discussion, that's totally fine. My presentation isn't going to run the entire hour from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, so I'm happy to share some time with Dr. Miller.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. Okay, now you have no excuse if you've had that burning question you thought you didn't have time for. You're on. This is your chance to pick the brain.
Yes, so did we have a question or comment here?
Not really a question, just a quick comment.
Sure.
Barbara, please change your voice settings. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Right-click and go to voice, and then go to shout.
I am going to shout. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Great. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Just a quick comment. I was very impressed with the presentation, by the way, Dr. Miller. And what I really wanted to say was that, a lot of this, quite frankly, a lot of the burden doesn't, in fact, rest on the cooperation, the collaboration, and the support that we get from administrators in seeing this actually to fruition. Because it's actually hard to use the technology, get the students engaged, if you don't have that backbone to support you. So I was really impressed with your presentation.
Well, thank you. And I just decided to go provocative and put out on the table some of these issues that are hard but we don't talk about. So I wonder, can you maybe flesh out just a little bit of an example of what does lack of support look like? Or what does support look like when it does happen? What does that look like to you as the faculty member?
To me, I'm in the tech department, so to me, it seems like I have to be the one training getting an administrator who's not tech savvy seems to be the key there in the support not being there. Because I believe that, the fact that they're not wanting to probably try something new or they're a little bit tech phobic the reluctance and the weight seems to fall on someone like myself to have to train them as well as the faculty, and not just train, but to try and convince them to move forward, to utilize the technology in the way that I see the potential of it, going. When you don't have an administrator who is tech savvy or who is tech current, I should also say, it seems to put a huge bump in the whole process. That you want to see something going, you want to see the technology be mobilized to its fullest potential, but when they don't see that, as the number one priority at the time, it takes a lot of convincing, especially when they themselves, the administrators that is, are not, tech current and tech forward, so to speak.
Right, and sometimes it's not even a matter of does this person kind of know all the latest tools that are out there, or can they use them themselves? But having a realistic idea of what it costs, not just to buy, but also to support, and the time and the effort of people like yourself, what the technology can realistically do and what it can't do. I think that's also the kind of tech savvy that is really valuable when you have it in an administrator or a leader, and can be very problematic when you don't. So, we got to name the problems in order to start addressing them. So I really thank you for your candor and articulating that issue really clearly, I think.
Other questions or comments? That was good, Barbara, I think. And just to comment on that, some people you just have to convince. You have to show them data. You have to show them results. And then they usually come around. But I think we have certain knowledge that when they don't have, they're not going to accept it without seeing some hard data themselves. So stay on top of the research. Be sure to feed that to those people and say, here's what's happening with this use of technology or that, and maybe we need to take a serious look at it. So maybe that can help.
Well, I hope to cross paths with more of you in this virtual environment over the course of our next couple of days together. And as I said, I learned so much, and I'm always so happy to talk to practitioners. So feel free to just walk up to me in this virtual environment or get in touch with me in another format. All right? And thank you so much for all you do for your institutions and for our students.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Thank you.
And